I remember the first time it happened. The auditorium lights had dimmed, casting everyone's faces in a soft blue glow from the projector. It was career day, and we were watching some documentary about futures we were supposed to envision for ourselves. But all I could focus on was how close Jamie's shoulder was to mine. We had started sitting together in the back row about a month earlier, not because we were troublemakers, but because Jamie had whispered to me once that he could focus better from a distance, and I'd nodded like I understood completely, even though my only reason for following him was, well, him. The back row had become our unspoken territory. Two seniors who'd known each other since middle school, but had only really started talking after being paired for a chemistry project last semester. Jamie had this way of explaining molecular bonds that made everything click for me, his hands moving through the air like he was conducting an invisible orchestra. "It's all about attraction," he'd said, his eyes meeting mine for a beat too long. "Some elements just naturally want to be together." That day in the auditorium, our classmates were spread out in their usual social clusters. The athletes bunched near the center, drama kids stage left, the overachievers in the front row with notebooks already open. But the back row was different. It existed in its own time zone, a place where the rules seemed to bend just slightly. The teachers rarely looked back here, too focused on managing the obvious troublemakers in the middle rows. It felt like our own island. I was pretending to watch the documentary, something about STEM careers and the future of technology, but all I could think about was the invisible line between our bodies. Jamie's arm was resting on the shared armrest, his fingers tapping a gentle rhythm I couldn't quite catch. I remember thinking how unfair it was that such a small distance could feel so vast, so impossible to cross. The narrator on screen was talking about taking risks for greater rewards when I felt it, the slightest pressure against my pinky finger. At first, I thought it was accidental. Jamie shifting in his seat, perhaps. But then his finger deliberately hooked over mine, and my heart practically seized in my chest. I kept my eyes forward, afraid that looking at him would break whatever spell had suddenly been cast over us. Our friendship hadn't started with any grand moment. It was built on accumulated seconds, catching each other's eyes across the cafeteria, laughing at the same obscure joke in English class, discovering we both obsessed over the same indie bands that nobody else at school seemed to know about. There was the time I'd mentioned offhandedly that I'd never seen the original Star Wars trilogy, and the next day Jamie had shown up with all 3 movies and an invitation to watch them at his house that weekend. His parents had been away, and we'd stayed up until 3 in the morning, talking more than watching. Our conversations drifting from movies to music to the kind of deep philosophical questions that only seem profound when you're 17 and the world is still unfolding before you. But nothing had prepared me for this moment, for the deliberate way his fingers now sought mine in the darkness. I remember holding my breath as he slowly, so slowly, laced our fingers together. His palm was warm against mine, slightly sweaty, or maybe that was me. I couldn't tell where my nervousness ended and his began. All I knew was that beneath the cover of darkness, hidden from the rows of students ahead of us, Jamie was holding my hand, and it felt like the most significant thing that had ever happened to me. Let me explain why this matters. That first touch, hidden away where no one could see. It wasn't just about the physical connection, though that sent electricity shooting up my arm. It was about recognition, about finally acknowledging something that had been building between us for months, something neither of us had been brave enough to name. In that darkened auditorium, with a boring documentary as our cover, we were carving out a space for ourselves that existed outside the careful roles we played every day. I remember wondering if anyone could tell, if the heat I felt rising to my face was visible, if my slightly quickened breathing would give us away. But everyone remained focused forward, absorbed in their own worlds, completely unaware of the monumental shift happening in the back row. It's strange how the most life-changing moments can pass entirely unnoticed by others. The documentary droned on, but I couldn't have repeated a single fact from it if my life depended on it. All my senses were concentrated on the points where our hands connected, on the gentle way Jamie's thumb occasionally moved across my knuckles. I wondered if he could feel my pulse racing through my wrist, if he knew the effect he was having on me. When the lights came up 40 minutes later, we separated naturally, smoothly, like we'd rehearsed it. Jamie stretched casually, and I reached down to grab my backpack. Our choreography perfect and unspoken. But something had changed. As we filed out with the rest of our class, Jamie bumped his shoulder against mine, a gesture that could be read as friendly to anyone watching, but I knew better. His eyes met mine briefly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, and I felt like we'd just exchanged a secret handshake to a club only we belonged to. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in my mind, the way his fingers had felt between mine, wondering what it meant for us going forward. Were we still just friends? Had we ever been just friends? The questions circled in my mind like restless birds, never landing on any certain answer. The next day at school, I was nervous about seeing him, worried that daylight might have changed things, that he might regret what happened. But when I saw him at his locker before first period, he looked up and his whole face brightened in a way that made my stomach flip. "Hey," he said, so casually, as if he hadn't completely transformed my world the day before. "Want to catch that new Marvel movie Friday? Back row has the best view." The emphasis he placed on back row was subtle, but unmistakable. This wasn't just about seeing a movie. This was about creating another opportunity to be together in that protected space. And so our back row ritual began. Movies at the local theater, school assemblies, pep rallies, anywhere with rows of seats, we gravitated toward the back. Sometimes we just sat close, our arms pressed together. Other times, when the darkness felt safe enough, our hands would find each other, fingers intertwining in now familiar patterns. We never spoke about it directly, not at first. It existed in a parallel universe to our regular friendship, the one where we ate lunch together, studied for tests, and talked about normal teenage stuff like college applications and which teachers gave the easiest final exams. The secrecy wasn't entirely about fear, though fear was certainly part of it. Our school wasn't particularly progressive. Just the previous year, a girl had tried to bring her girlfriend to prom and had faced so much backlash she ended up changing schools. And while my parents had never said anything explicitly homophobic, they made uncomfortable faces during TV shows with gay characters and changed the channel during certain commercials. Jamie's family was religious, not extremist, but traditional enough that he never brought up anything related to LGBTQ+ topics at home. But the secrecy was also about protection. What we had felt fragile and new, like a seedling that needed shelter before it could face the full force of the sun. Those moments in the back row were ours alone, untouched by judgment or expectations. There was something magical about having this one thing that belonged just to us. Of course, keeping secrets takes its toll. I started becoming hyper-aware of how I acted around Jamie when others were present. Was I looking at him too long? Did my voice change when I spoke to him? Were our inside jokes too intimate? I began second-guessing every interaction, trying to maintain the perfect balance between friendly and suspicious. Jamie seemed better at navigating this double life. He was naturally reserved, less likely to wear his emotions openly. But sometimes I'd catch a look of exhaustion cross his face when we'd have to drop each other's hands as the lights came up, or when a friend would unexpectedly join us at what was supposed to be lunch for two. In those moments, I could see that the weight of hiding was wearing on him too. The back row became more than just a physical location. It became a metaphor for our relationship. We were always at the periphery, watching life happen from a distance, never quite stepping into the center where we could be fully seen. And while there was comfort in our private world, there was also a growing sadness in knowing that such an important part of our lives had to remain in the shadows. About 2 months into our back row ritual, we had our first real conversation about what was happening between us. It was after a particularly boring assembly about standardized test preparation. We'd held hands through most of it, and as everyone filed out, we lingered, letting the crowd thin before we joined them. "Do you ever wonder," Jamie said quietly, his eyes focused on the empty stage ahead, "what it would be like if we didn't have to let go when the lights come on?" The question hung between us, heavier than any touch we'd shared. I remember swallowing hard, my throat suddenly dry. All the time, I admitted. It was the first acknowledgement that what we were doing had meaning beyond the moment, that we both wanted something more than these stolen touches. "I'm not ready," he said, finally looking at me. "For everyone to know. For the questions and the looks and the everything that would come with it. But I need you to know that this isn't just." He gestured vaguely between us. "Nothing. To me. It's not nothing to me either," I said, my voice barely above a whisper even though the auditorium was now empty. "It's pretty much everything." He smiled then, a smile that started in his eyes and slowly spread to the rest of his face. Yeah, yeah, I confirmed, wishing desperately that I could reach for his hand again, but aware that a teacher could walk in at any moment to check that the room was clear. That conversation changed things between us. Our back row moments became charged with new meaning now that we'd acknowledged them out loud. And slowly, our secret world began to expand beyond those hidden handholds. Notes passed in class with words we wouldn't dare say aloud. Text messages late at night that crossed the line from friendly to something much more. A playlist Jamie made for me titled simply Back Row, filled with songs about secret love and quiet longing. The first time we kissed wasn't in the back row. It was in Jamie's car, parked at the far end of the lake where local families went fishing in the summer. It was early spring, still too cold for many visitors, and we'd driven out there after school with the pretense of studying for a history test. I don't remember who moved first. Memory has a way of blurring the details of pivotal moments. But I do remember the hesitation just before our lips met, both of us hovering in that space of possibility, hearts racing with equal parts fear and anticipation. When we finally kissed, it felt like the culmination of 1,000 back row moments, 1,000 secret touches and glances. His lips were soft, his hand gentle as it cupped my cheek. It was tender and uncertain and perfect in its imperfection. When we pulled apart, Jamie rested his forehead against mine, eyes closed, and whispered, "I've been wanting to do that since chemistry class last semester." I laughed, relief and joy bubbling up inside me. You should have. It would have made balancing equations a lot more interesting. Our relationship evolved, but the back row remained special to us. It was our origin story, the place where we'd first found the courage to reach for each other. Even as we found other private spaces, his empty house when his parents worked late, the hiking trail behind my neighborhood where we'd walk for hours, talking and kissing and planning futures we weren't sure could exist, we still gravitated to those back row seats whenever the opportunity arose. The turning point came 3 weeks before graduation. We were at a school talent show, sitting in our usual spots, fingers intertwined as we watched our classmates perform with varying degrees of skill. Halfway through the show, I felt a presence behind us. Someone had entered late and was making their way along the back wall. I instinctively started to pull my hand away, but Jamie held firm, his grip tightening just enough to communicate that he didn't want to let go. My heart hammered in my chest as footsteps approached. Then came a voice, "Hey, mind if I sit here?" And suddenly Megan from our English class was sliding into the seat next to Jamie. Before I could process what was happening, she glanced down at our joined hands, then back up at our faces. There was a moment of perfect stillness, like the world had pressed pause, and I braced myself for disgust, for a scene, for the end of our carefully maintained secret. Instead, Megan simply smiled, a small, knowing smile, and turned her attention to the stage where someone was performing an off-key rendition of a pop song. She said nothing, made no big deal of what she'd seen, but in that moment, our private universe had expanded to include someone else. The sky hadn't fallen. The world hadn't ended. Someone new, and we were still breathing. After the show, as people filed out, Megan caught up with us in the hallway. "Hey," she said, her voice casual but her eyes serious. "Just so you know, I think it's really cool. You guys, and I'm not going to say anything to anyone." Jamie and I exchanged glances, having one of our silent conversations. It was Jamie who spoke first. "Thanks," he said simply. "We're not really public yet." "I get it," Megan nodded. "My sister and her girlfriend were the same way for a long time. It's a process." She gave us another smile and then disappeared into the crowd, leaving us standing there, slightly stunned by this unexpected ally. That night, Jamie called me, his voice tight with emotion. "I keep thinking about what happened with Megan," he said, "and how it felt when she saw us." "Terrifying," I suggested, remembering the initial surge of panic. "At first, yeah," he agreed. "But then, I don't know. There was something kind of relieving about it. Like, someone else knows this real thing between us, and the world didn't end." I knew exactly what he meant. For all the safety our secrecy had provided, it had also created a kind of unreality around our relationship, as if what we had might disappear if exposed to the light. Megan's simple acceptance had made it feel more solid somehow, more legitimate. "I've been thinking," Jamie continued, his voice growing quieter. "Graduation's in 3 weeks. then summer, and then we're both off to college. We'd both been accepted to universities about an hour apart, close enough to see each other regularly, but far enough that we'd be starting fresh in new communities. What if we stopped hiding? Not a big announcement or anything, but just not hiding anymore. The proposition hung between us, momentous in its simplicity, just not hiding anymore. No more dropping hands when others approached. No more carefully calculated distance in public. No more back row as our only safe space. Are you sure? I asked, knowing what this could mean for him, especially with his family. No, he admitted with a small laugh. I'm terrified, actually. But I'm more scared of going to college still living like this, still keeping the most important person in my life a secret. I don't want to start our new chapter the same way we've been living this one. His words resonated with something that had been growing in me too, a weariness with the constant vigilance, the careful calculations of what was safe to show and what wasn't. Okay, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Let's do it. Let's not hide anymore. We decided to start small. The next day at school, Jamie met me at my locker, and when we walked to class, he took my hand in the hallway. It was a simple gesture, one that dozens of straight couples did every day without a second thought. But for us, it felt like stepping off a cliff. I remember the immediate hush that fell over the students nearby, the double takes and widened eyes. Someone whispered something I couldn't quite catch. A freshman girl smiled broadly at us. A guy from the baseball team looked confused, then shrugged and continued his conversation. The world, it turned out, did not end. There were looks, certainly. Questions from friends who thought they knew everything about us. A few uncomfortable encounters with people whose religious or political views made them less than accepting. Jamie's parents took it harder than mine. There were tears and arguments and a painful week where his father barely spoke to him. But there was also surprising support from unexpected places. My history teacher, Mr. Gonzalez, pulled me aside after class to tell me he and his husband had been together for 15 years. The captain of the soccer team, a guy I'd barely spoken to in 4 years of high school, clapped Jamie on the shoulder in the cafeteria and said, "About time. You two were obvious as hell." The most unexpected reaction came from Mrs. Winters, our stern, old-school chemistry teacher who had paired us together on that fateful project months ago. She stopped us in the hall one day, fixed us with her trademark intense stare, and said, "I've been teaching for 32 years. I know chemistry when I see it." Then she walked away, leaving us stunned and laughing in her wake. Graduation came, and for the first time, we sat together not in the back row, but right in the middle of our class, our gowned shoulders touching as we listened to speeches about futures and possibilities. When Jamie's name was called to receive his diploma, I cheered embarrassingly loud, not caring who turned to look. And when we threw our caps in the air, he found me in the chaos, pulled me close, and kissed me right there among our classmates, teachers, and families. It wasn't our first kiss, but it was our first truly public one, and it felt like a declaration, to ourselves as much as to everyone else. The summer after graduation was golden in my memory. Freed from the constraints of secrecy, we discovered what it meant to just be together, without constantly looking over our shoulders. We went on proper dates, dinner at restaurants where we sat across from each other holding hands on the table, movies where we shared popcorn and didn't just touch in secret. We met each other's extended families, navigated the awkwardness of introducing each other as my boyfriend for the first time. It wasn't always easy, and not everyone was immediately accepting, but it was real in a way our back row relationship had never quite been allowed to be. The night before we left for our respective colleges, we returned to the local movie theater where we'd spent so many hours in the back row. The movie itself was forgettable, some action blockbuster that neither of us was particularly interested in, but that wasn't why we were there. As the lights dimmed and the previews began to roll, Jamie reached over and laced his fingers with mine, just as he had done so many times before. "You know," he whispered, leaning close to my ear, "we don't have to sit in the back row anymore, but I still like it best." I squeezed his hand, understanding exactly what he meant. The back row would always be special to us, not because it had hidden us, but because it had sheltered us while we found the courage to step into the light. It had given us the space to discover who we were together before we had to face what the world thought about it. "Me too," I whispered back. "But I'm glad we get to choose now." As the movie started, I looked at our intertwined fingers resting openly on the armrest between us. No secrets, no fear, just two people holding hands in a darkened theater because they wanted to be close to each other. It seemed so simple now, almost ordinary. But I knew better. I knew the journey it had taken to reach this ordinary moment, the courage it had required to move from hidden touches to open affection. The back row had been our beginning, but it wasn't our whole story. It was just the first chapter in something that continued to unfold between us, page by page, day by day, hand in hand, sometimes in shadow, sometimes in light, but always, always together. Total _char_count, 18,736.